Today's daf yomi is Avodah Zarah daf Chaf, Avodah Zarah 20. Today's daf yomi is dedicated for Shmir for the Chayalim, Matzal for the Shvuyim, and Yeshua for Am Yisrael and the Face Dara. We're going to start with the Mishnah on the bottom of Yutes Amabeis. The Mishnah says, well, let's see if the Mishnah says it. We'll say the first lines, and then we'll come back to whether or not the Mishnah says it. It says, Ein osin tachshitim avodas kachavim. You're not allowed to make jewelry for idolatry, katlos, v'nizamim mitabos. You can't make necklaces, rings, nose rings, and regular rings. Rabbi Eliezer Omer b'schar mutar. Rabbi Eliezer says this is permitted if you're getting paid for it. Tosos says this is not the text of our Mishnah. Tosos takes this out of the text. He says it's impossible. It's not logical that there would be any Tana that would allow you chatchila to make jewelry for idolatry. Also, why doesn't Rashi comment on this? And also, why doesn't the Gemara comment on this? So Tosfos takes it out. So it's in our printed text. So we read it, but I just be aware that many commentaries say it's not part of the text of our Mishnah. You're not allowed to sell anything the idolaters that's attached to the ground. We'll see why in the Gemara. But you could sell it once it was cut down. You could sell it with the intent on the condition that the idolater has to cut it down. So I asked the Gemara, what's the source for this idea that you're not allowed to sell anything attached to the ground to the idolater? Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina explains, based upon the fact that the verse says, or on top of Chafam Aleph, Amakra, Lo Sichanim. It says in the pasuk in Dvarim, the Son of Hashem al Panecha, God will place these idolaters before you, V'ikisam Hacharem Tacharim Osam. You shall strike them down, you shall excommunicate them, destroy them. Lo Sichros Lahem Bris. Do not make a covenant. Lo Sichanim. Do not be tichanim against them. What does that mean? Says the Gemara, that you're not allowed to give them a place in the land. So that's what it means. And so therefore you can't sell them anything attached to the ground. The Gemara says, wait 1 second. We need it for something else. It says because it says Lotitain Lahem Chain. So meaning to say that you're not allowed to give them favor. Rashi says, Shelo Yomar in Cain, Shelo Yomar, Kama Ovikchavim Zena, that you're not allowed to say how beautiful, how handsome is this idolater. So it can't be that it's just Lo Chaniya B'Karka, that you can't give them a place to camp in the ground, because it needs to tell us that you're not allowed to compliment their beauty. You know, Gemara says, "Im kain lemakra lo sechunam, ma lo sechaneim shma min atarki." Then we say both of them are true, and you're not allowed to give them a place in the ground, and you also cannot give them a place. You cannot compliment their good appearance. Whereas it says, "Vakazmi," by the way, no, but we still needed to teach us something else, that you're not allowed to give them free gifts. So the Gemara says, no. We have all these three things. From wo techanim, we see from here, A, you cannot give them real estate, you cannot compliment their beauty, and you can also not give them free gifts. So the Gemara says, that Gemara says, Tanya Nam Yachin, we have a brisa that teaches this, because it says in the brisa, you're not giving them real estate. Do not compliment their beauty. You're not allowed to give them free gifts. So all these three things that weren't out from this one verse. Gemara says, this idea of whether or not you're allowed to give them idolater a gift is in fact itself a dispute amongst the Tanaim. The Tanya, because they have a brisa, And one pasuk says, "Lo sochu kol nevela." The pasuk says, "Do not eat any carcass, an animal that was not slaughtered." Well, ger asher b'sharecha titnana. You shall give it to the ger. Here, the ger doesn't mean the way we use ger today, which is a convert. In this context, the verse means a ger toshav. A ger toshav is a non-Jew who lived amongst the Jews and accepted upon himself the Noahide laws, and he was observing the Noahide laws. So if you have an animal that you own that was not slaughtered, it's called a carcass. So then you're not allowed to eat it. Give it to the ger that is in your gates. And he will eat it, or sell it to the idolater. So that's what the pasuk says. It says the Brisa, I might think you can either give it to the idolater, give it to the ger, or sell it to the idolater. How do I know that you're allowed to sell it to the idolater? Tamomer titnena. You could give it. And the pasuk says, titnena o machor. That you could give it or you could sell. And how do I know you're allowed to give it to the idolater? So we see from here, according to Rabbi Meir, who argues with the position that you're allowed, that we said above, Rabbi Meir says you're allowed to give it or sell it to both the ger and to the idolater, and so therefore that's the position that argues with the earlier position, which said that you cannot gift something to an idolater. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Dvarim Kelsavam. Rabbi Yehuda argues with Rabbi Meir, and he's consistent with the position we cited above. Says Lager ben Esino Ovikchav b'mechira. So that he says no, you're only allowed to give it to the convert, to the ger toshav. You can't sell it to him, and to the idolater, you're only allowed to sell it. You can't give it to him. So, so. So this is, if you take it literally, Tosfos asked this question. If you take it literally, you have a big problem because you're not allowed to you're not allowed to sell something to the ger toshav. We sell things all the time to Jews. You have to give it to the ger toshav. So the ger toshav is even stricter than a Jew. You have to say this is specifically limited to a carcass, to a nevela. That's why there's a prohibition upon selling it. And also, you have to, Joseph says they didn't have many people like that around them, and so therefore it's very unusual. So it wasn't like they were changing the whole economic structure. So, okay. So anyway, the Gemara continues. The Gemara says, "Shapir kama Ramei Rabbi Yehuda." Rabbi Yehuda, Ramei says, "No, sell it to the that you could sell it or give it to either one." He's saying a good logic to Rabbi Yehuda. Amrocha, no, Rabbi Yehuda Amrocha. If it would be like Rameir said, it would say, give it, eat it, and sell it. Oh, Lamali, why did it say the word or? Shmami, no, it's Barm Kilsavan Hudasa. So it's tell us that you can either gift it or sell it, but you can give it to the ger toshav and sell it to the idolater. You can't do both. Gemara says, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Meir is saying, no, you're supposed to give it's better to give it to the ger toshav than to sell it to the idolater. That's what Meir says. So the Gemara and Tosfos says this is only about nevela. That's what we're talking about. That it's only specifically nevela that it's a mitzvah to give it to the ger toshav before you sell it to the idolater. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda kimin the ger tamitzuva lachyoso v'kanani yet tamitzuva lachyoso v'haktem l'tzarka. Rabbi Yehuda agrees with the Rameir about that, but he says you don't need a pasuk tell us that you give it to the ger toshav before you sell it to the idolater because you're obligated to support the ger toshav, and you're not obligated to support the idolater. Okay, so now we're up to the next piece. So it says the Racha wrote to Chanem Otitein Laim Chaim. So it said in the Bryce above that you're not allowed to compliment their beauty. So Messiah Rav, this supports Rav. The Amar Rav also Adam Shiomer Kama Now Avodas Kochalim. Supports Rav that you're not allowed to say, look how beautiful is this woman who's an idolater. You're not allowed to compliment her beauty. So Meisvei, is that really the case? So there's a Bryce that says that there was an incident with Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. Where was he? He was on the highest point of the Temple Mount. He was on the mount. The Har HaBayis is a mountain. He's the highest spiritual level. And he was on the Maila. He was on a step, or he's on a peak on top of the Temple Mount. So clearly, he's at the highest spiritual level possible. And he saw a beautiful woman who was an idolater. Amar Marabu Ma'asecha Hashem. He said, look how beautiful is this woman. But he didn't say that, actually. He didn't say, look how beautiful is this woman. He said, Marabu Ma'asech Hashem. Look how great are your deeds, God. So we see from here, he did compliment the beauty of the idolater. So how could Rav say you're not allowed to do it? And some of the commentaries say that this idea here is that Rav Shimon Gamliel was in the highest spiritual level. And the highest spiritual level is when you can look at a person who's beautiful, and that if you are not on such a high spiritual level, you would look at this woman and you might have improper thoughts. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel was in the highest spiritual level. He was able to look at beauty and not be excited, but instead he was just able to talk about the greatness of God's creatures. Rabbi Akiva, also we have a similar incident with Rabbi Akiva. Ra'ah Eshes Turnus Rufus Harasha. He saw the wife of Turnus Rufus, and when he saw her, Rak Stichek Ubacha, he spit, he laughed, and he cried. Rak Shai Sabah Mitipas Rucha. He spit because she came from he was reminding himself, she just came from a putrid drop that, again, she was just flesh and blood. Stichek, he laughed, Da'asida de Megaira, in the future she was going to convert in Nasavah, and he would marry her. And Bacha Da'ai Shufra Buyafa, because he cried because this beauty was going to end up as earth, as dust and maggots, basically. So the Gemara in Nedarim tells us the story that Turnus Rufus used to debate Rabbi Akiva, and then one time he came home very sad, and as I said, allow me to try to seduce him, and I'll expose him. And Rabbi Akiva, when he saw her, he spit, he laughed, and he cried. And he said, why are you doing this? He said, I'll explain to you why I spit, and I'll explain to you why I cry. But he didn't explain why he laughed. And then in the end, she converted and married him. So I guess this is not the Rabbi Akiva wife that we know from other instances. The Rachel, who was the daughter of Bar Kalba Savua, she was the daughter of Ben Kalba Savua, and who he bought a Jerusalem of gold for. So this was a different woman who must have married her later on in his life. So the Rav Udiyu Hudakamode. So how come Rav said that? How would Rav explain what Rabbi Shimon Gamliel was doing? He and Rabbi Akiva was doing. They were basically just giving praise to God. The Amar Mara Roa Brios Tovos Omer Baruch Shakacha Barabo Amo. As we learned, somebody who sees a beautiful human being should say, "Look," or a creature, not just necessarily a human being. Say, "Look how beautiful is the world that God created. Blessed is the one who created this world." Is it really permitted to gaze upon a woman? Meisrei didn't we learn Mishmarta Mikol Davara Shal Yistakal Adam Beisha Noav Afil Penuya and Beishes Isha Afil Mechuaris. You're not allowed to look upon a woman who's beautiful, even if she's unmarried, and you're not allowed to look at a married woman, even if she's not attractive. So the Gemara says, and the Brisa continues to love a big date Seva Shalisha, and you're not allowed to look at the colored garments of a woman, V'lo B'chamor, V'lo B'chamora. You're not allowed to look at donkeys mating, you're not allowed to look at pigs mating. You're not allowed to look at birds while they're mating. Even somebody who's filled with eyes, like the angel of death, which is a strange expression. This is a strange expression. And the commentaries struggle with it, meaning to say that he can't close both of his eyes at once, meaning to say the Gemara is to tell us that even if he's just surrounded by women. He has no choice. Yeah, like he's completely full of eyes. He has to close his eyes. Amro of Malach Hamavet Shakul Moyam Naim, that he's so full of eyes, he sees everything. B'shas b'tirasa shachola, and when the sick person is about to die, Omein Me'al Roshosaf, he stands over his head. V'charvo shlufa biyado, he draws a sword. V'tipa shalmara tuliyabo, and he has a drop of poison on his sword. Kibin shachola roa also. Once a sick person sees him, is dazeya uposeach piv. He shakes and he opens up his mouth in fright. V'zarkos al piv, and the poison gets thrown into his mouth. Mimena mace. From that poison he dies. Mimena masriach. That poison, the body begins to rot. Mimena panam marikos. From that poison, the face changes its expression. So how can Rabbi Shimon and we all look at this woman and notice her beauty and compliment God on it? So Gemara says, Karen Zavasavi. It wasn't his choice. He was just wandering around the corner and he basically ran right into seeing her. But he obviously would not have stared at her on his own. And the Gemara said, the Bryce said, I look at the colored garments of a woman because you may come to be excited. So I'm Rabbi Yehuda, I'm Shmuel, I feel shetuchan on gabe kosel, even if she's not wearing them, even if they're just spread out on the wall. I'm Rabbi Papa b'makir bali, and when is this a problem? Only if you know who owns them. That you basically then you have an image in your mind. And I'm Rabbi Dekanami Dekatani V'Bigdei Tseva Isha. It says not the garments of a woman. V'Katani V'Bigdei Tzivonin. It doesn't say not a color garment. It says not the color garments of a woman. So that proves like we just said. Shema mina. Rav Chisda said this is only by old garments. Avobatiki Hani Mili Beatiki by old garments. Avobatadasi, but if it's a new garment, laceline bar. There's not a problem talking it. Because if you're not going to say this, Anan Minoa Shafure. How do we ever give our garments to a shafure? Rashi says a shafure is a launderer who fixes the garments. How would you ever give it to them? Because he's hakamistako. He's looking at it. Gemara says, no, that's not a question. According to your logic, that which Rabbi Yehuda taught, min b'mino mutar la'achnis k'machal b'shafol feres. That Rabbi Yehuda allows you, if you need to mate the animals, that you're allowed to basically help the mating process by guiding it with your hands. But how can you do that? How come you're looking? How about vidosatar? No, because you're preoccupied, it's your job. You don't have time for the improper thoughts. By the animals and hachinami, about vidosatar. The tailor is allowed to do it because he's not going to be improper. Amar Mar mimena mace, from when the poison of the angel of death goes into his mouth. That's how the person dies. Maybe this is an argument on the father of Shmuel. The Amar Avodah Shmuel, Amar Malach Hamaves. The father of Shmuel said, the angel of death said to me, Ilo de Chayshina Likare Dibriyasa have a parana base Ashchita Kevehema. He says, we're not worried about the Yakara Dibriyasa, the honor. The angel of death says, the angel of death had a conversation with Shmuel, and Shmuel says that the angel of death said, were I not concerned to give honor to people, meaning the angel of death is even worried about kavod brios, I would parana beis shchita, I would just tear open their throat and kill people that way, kivahema, like an animal. So we see he doesn't die from the poison. People don't die from the poison; they die from the slaughter of the angel of death. The Gemara says, no, doma hi tipa mechatcho simana. No, it's just that drop of poison is what cuts the pipes. It cuts the trachea and the esophagus. Gemara says, "Mimena masriach." The Bright said, from that he begins to rot. If you don't want the body to rot, flip him over. You flip him over, and then the body won't rot. We have a problem with this. The problem with this is, aren't you causing him to die if you move a ghost? So first of all, many commentaries say, no, this only means right after he's dead. That's what Tosfos Chachmei Anglia says. Meaning to say, And that basically is saying, well, because he's already got the poison inside him, so then you don't want him to rot, so therefore you flip him over afterwards so you don't notice the smell. But that's a little bit difficult because it's not really what the text says. So the little text seems to say that you flip him over after he gets the poison and before he dies. But that could be a problem because of the concept of quickening a death. So we have for another discussion. I just want people to be aware of that. Tanar Rabbanan v'nishmartem mikol davar says in the pasuk in Deuteronomy, when you are out to warn your enemies, you have to want to be careful of anything that's bad. What does this mean? A person is not allowed to have a thought during the day, an improper thought, which will cause him to have tumah, to have his seed come out at night. So from here, Rav Pinchas ben Yair taught, and this is the brisa of Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair, which becomes the brisa that's the basis for one of the 5 greatest works in the canon of Jewish of rabbinic literature called the Mesilas Yesharim of Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto. It's based upon this brisa. Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto was the 17th century incredible scholar who was never married, and he was shunned by the generation of his time, perhaps because he was never married, and he died in his early 30s. And while he was alive, his works were excommunicated. They threw everything. They actually took all of his works, put them in a coffin, and threw it into the river off of Amsterdam. But Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto not only wrote this great work, Mesilas Yesharim, he wrote other great works. And his people say that he basically was the forerunner to many, many different fields. Chassidut is the forerunner to Chassidut, as we'll see in this brisa, to Kabbalah, to modern Kabbalah, to the Musar movement, personal improvement, not to mention also to other areas. So a work of absolute genius, a man of absolute genius and piety. Anyway, it says Pinchas ben Yair, Torah Mevio Days the heroes. Torah brings us to being more careful. The hero. I mean, I'm translating these words literally. Clearly, you have to read Mesilas Yesharim to see what they really mean. The heroes Mevio Days Rizos. If you're careful about your life, it brings you to Zrizos, alacrity. Zrizos Mevio Day Nekiyos. If you're Zrizos, it leads you to cleanliness. To not cleanliness, but purity. Nekiyos Mevio Day Precious. That leads you to Precious. Precious is where you are an ascetic. You separate yourself more from sexual sins. Precious Mevila de Tara, that leads you to purity. Tara Mevila de Chasidus is, some say that it really is Kedusha, to holiness. Kedusha Mevila de Anava. Holiness brings you to humility. Anava Mevila de Yeruslet. Humility brings you to fear of sin. And Yeruslet Mevila de. So here, again, we change the text to Chasidus. Fear of sin brings you to piety. Chasidus miveu lidei ruach hakodesh. Chasidus brings you to divine providence. Ruach hakodesh miveu lidei klias mason. That leads you to the resurrection of the dead. The Chasidus kedoa mikon, and piety is the highest level. Nemar az dibarta bechazon chasidecha. So only one who is the Chasidus will get the vision of God. Well, God will speak to them. Please, Reb Shimon Levi. This argues Reb Shimon Levi. Reb Shimon Levi, Anava Gedol Mikon. He says humility is the greatest, as it states in Isaiah. Ruach Hashem Okem Ola Yan Mashach Hashem Oti V'Vasar Anavim. God pulled me to tell the Anavim that God sent me to redeem the humble ones. Chasidim will ne'amar, doesn't say the pious ones, ela anavim, the humble ones. Hamatash anava gedol mikol. We see from here that humility is greatest of all. And then we just finishing up the mission. It says you're not allowed to sell to them anything attached to the ground. Tanar Rabbanan, Mochron, Elon, Almanas lakutz, you could sell them a tree if they stipulate that they will cut it down. Bekotzitz, they have to cut it down. David Rabbi Yehuda, Rameir Omer, Emok, El Kitzuta, Shach. So Rabbi Emok line El Kitzuta. Rameir says you're only allowed to sell them if it's already cut down. Shachas, this is the crops that began to blossom a little bit. It's still attached to the ground. Almanas ligzos vigosi. David Rabbi Yehuda, you could sell it to them on the condition that they're going to cut it down, as long as they do cut it down immediately. Rabbi Meir Omer Emokrin one Ela Gezusa. No, you can only sell it to them if it's already cut. Kama, if it's a standing grain, Almanas Liktor, on the condition that they harvested, the coats are they harvested through Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Meir Omer Emokrin Ela Kitsura, only if it's already harvested. So we see the same basic law. Can't sell them a tree unless it's, Rabbi Yehuda says you could sell it on the condition that they cut it, and then they have to cover. Meir says you can't sell it to them. Also the shachas, Rabbi Yehuda says the condition that they cut it. Rabbi Meir says you can't do it at all. And also the crops, on the condition they cut it, and Rabbi Meir says no, you can't do it at all. Tzricha, why do we need all three? The iash mi'inon Eilan, if you only have the case of a tree, but how come Rabbi Meir? That's where Rabbi Meir says that you can't cut it down. Kivan Delo Pase, because since the guy won't lose anything if he leaves a tree, we have to be concerned, Mashile, that even though he made his condition, he'll leave it there. Avo, hi, the Kimashile Pase, but if the crops and the shachas, if he'll leave it there, then they'll get ruined. Ema Module. Maybe I'll agree with Rabbi Yehuda. And if we only had these two cases, the crops and the tree, because it's not clear what they're gaining by being attached. The idea of shivchayo, but shachas, the longer it's attached, it grows more. Maybe Rabbi Yehuda would agree with Rameir. And if you only had the shachas case, Rameir, that's Rameir says you can't do it. But by the tree and the crops, Rabbi Yehuda. Maybe agree with Rabbi Yehuda that you're allowed to do it. So it's true. We need all the cases. We weren't earlier, you're not allowed to sell a behemoth to a guy because we're worried that you're going to work them on Shabbos. So now the Gemara asks the question, let's say sell the animal on the condition that you're going to slaughter it. Won't be that halacha there. Sometime I shari Rabbi Yehuda. Why does Rabbi Yehuda allow you to sell something attached to ground? Because the real estate is not in the guy's possession after the sale. You're just selling him the tree. And so he has the tree all around the Jew, so he's going to cut it down. Well, so he's not going to keep it up. Well, but the animal maybe he's going to leave it in his possession, and so therefore he's not going to slaughter it. Maybe we don't make a distinction. Rabbi Yehuda would always allow it. Tashma, the Gemara says the time Rabbi Yehuda allows it. You only allow it to sell it when it's already slaughtered. This is today's daf, a beautiful daf. Yeah, Shakoa.
Thank you.